Have you ever felt like you were living a life that wasn't truly yours? Meet Emily, a woman who seemed to have it all, until the silence in her home revealed a deep longing for connection. As her husband becomes more distant, a new friendship begins to awaken something inside her that she thought was lost forever. What happens when the lines between loyalty and desire blur? Stay tuned to uncover Emily's journey of self discovery and the choices that could change everything. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more captivating stories. I never thought my life would head in this direction. When I reflect on everything now, I wonder how things shifted so gradually, so silently, without me even noticing. I had it all: a devoted husband, a lovely house, a life filled with ease. Yet there was a void, something I couldn't clearly define. My name is Emily, and this is the journey of my life. My husband, Daniel, is a businessman. He's always been dedicated to his career, constantly pushing for greater success. That was something I respected about him and still do. But eventually, his work began to take over. He spent more and more time away, always traveling or buried in his job. Even when he was physically present, his mind was elsewhere. Our talks became brief, meals turned quiet, and soon silence became the usual way we communicated. I kept telling myself it was part of marriage, that these things were just phases and would pass. But days slipped into weeks, and weeks stretched into months, and all of a sudden, I felt like a guest in my own home. The man I once called my closest companion now felt like someone I barely knew. It wasn't that Daniel didn't care about me. I knew he did, in his own way. He made sure I had what I needed. Never missed a birthday or anniversary. But there was a lack of something I couldn't ignore: a closeness, a bond, the feeling of truly being acknowledged. I missed the kind of talks we used to have, the ones that didn't get interrupted by his phone ringing or an email that just couldn't wait. I wished for just one evening where we could talk freely like we once did. I made the effort. I organized dinners, suggested trips, and gently tried to share how I was feeling, hoping he'd understand. But his reply was always the same: "Things will slow down soon, Emily. Just a bit longer." That line turned into a constant in our relationship, a promise that was never fulfilled. And then came Jason. He had been employed with our family for almost 2 years as our driver. But he was more than that. He was observant. He picked up on the moments when I seemed off, when I was unusually quiet or deep in thought. He wasn't invasive, but there was something about the way he acknowledged me that made me feel noticed. It all began very simply: "Good morning, Mrs. Carter," with a smile that seemed heartfelt, light conversation during the rides, just friendly exchanges about weather or city news. Yet those brief talks slowly became the highlights of my day. One afternoon, after Daniel had left for another work trip, I found myself staring out of the car window, lost in thought. Jason glanced at me through the rearview mirror and asked, "Everything all right, ma'am?" It was a simple question, but the sincerity in his voice made me pause. It wasn't said out of formality, it was genuine. I almost brushed it off like I usually did, but that day I didn't. "I'm fine," I began, then sighed. "Actually, I'm not sure." Jason didn't push for more. He simply gave a quiet nod, like he was letting me know it was okay to feel unsure. And for the first time in a long while, it felt like someone was really paying attention. It wasn't anything grand or sudden, just something easy, a basic conversation that reminded me what it felt like to be acknowledged. That was how it all started. The days that followed felt altered somehow, though everything around me stayed the same. Daniel was still constantly busy, and I was still following the same daily pattern. But something inside of me had shifted. It was gentle, quiet, but definite. I began to look forward to my time in the car, those small exchanges that broke up the long silences of my routine. Jason never overstepped any lines, never made me uncomfortable, but there was a kindness in his words that brought me back to life. He helped me feel human again, not just someone left behind. At first, I told myself it was meaningless, just harmless chats. I wasn't doing anything wrong. I wasn't being unfaithful. Still, the more time passed, the more I realized how much I valued those conversations, how deeply I appreciated having someone who actually listened. One night, Daniel phoned to say his trip would be extended again. "Just a few more days, Emily. I'll make it up to you, I promise." I had lost track of how many times he had said that. I didn't even feel disappointed anymore, just worn out. I put the phone down and rubbed my temples. The house felt too spacious, too quiet. I'd gotten used to being alone, but that didn't mean it hurt any less. I had spent years justifying things to myself, insisting that this was what marriage was. But I started to wonder, was it really meant to feel this lonely? That evening, instead of going to bed, I walked outside and sat on the front steps. The air was cool, and the sky above was sprinkled with stars. I curled up, arms around my knees, listening to the overwhelming quiet. I didn't even notice the footsteps behind me until Jason's voice broke through. "Long day?" I looked up, startled. He normally left after dropping me off. I hadn't expected him to be there. I gave a slight nod. "Something like that." He waited for a moment, then sat down a short distance away, respectfully keeping space. "Is there anything I can do?" he asked. I let out a soft, tired laugh. "Not unless you can get my husband to come home." Jason stayed silent at first, eyes focused on the sky, as if turning my words over in his mind. Then, after a moment, he said, "You must miss him a lot." I turned to look at him, and truly looked. There was no judgment in his expression, no trace of pity, just a quiet empathy. "I do," I answered. "At least, I think I do." It's hard to miss someone who's never really around. The words came out before I could hold them back, and suddenly I felt exposed. Jason simply gave a small nod, as though he grasped what I was saying. We remained seated, sharing a long stretch of quiet together. The silence didn't feel tense or strange, in fact. It was calming. I couldn't recall the last time I had just sat beside someone without feeling like I needed to fill the quiet with small talk or unnecessary chatter. Eventually, I exhaled and got to my feet. "I should head inside," I said. Jason got up too and nodded in agreement. "Good night, Mrs. Carter." I paused for a second. You can call me Emily. He gave a slight smile. Good night, Emily. As I made my way into the house, I felt something stir within me, something I hadn't experienced in ages. It wasn't regret or remorse. It was something else entirely, something I didn't quite have a name for. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. The house was quiet, just like it always was. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat beside the window, watching the outside world slowly wake up. A few neighborhood kids rode by on their bikes, and an older couple strolled past with their dog. For a moment, I felt like I was watching life unfold from the outside, like I wasn't really part of it. I checked my phone, no messages from Daniel, no missed calls. I wasn't surprised. Later that afternoon, Jason showed up to take me to an appointment I had set a while ago. When I got into the car, he greeted me with his usual friendly smile. Good morning, Emily. For some reason, hearing my first name instead of Mrs. Carter made me smile back. Nice morning, Jason. As we drove, we made the usual light conversation. At one point, he looked over at me and smiled. You seem different today. I lifted an eyebrow. Different how? He gave a small shrug. You just seem less worn out, more like the real you. I didn't know how to respond. Was I more myself now? And if so, what did that even mean? I decided to steer the conversation in another direction. Tell me something about yourself, I said. Jason looked a little taken aback. I nodded. You know quite a bit about me, but I don't really know much about you. He paused to think, then replied, There's not much to share, really. I grew up in a small town, moved out here a few years back. I've been driving for a while now, but I've done other stuff too. Like what? I asked. He smiled faintly. A little of everything. Worked construction for a time, did some mechanic stuff. Driving just ended up being what stuck. I tilted my head. Do you enjoy it? He paused. Some days, yeah. I like meeting new people. I enjoy driving. But sometimes I wonder if I'm meant to be doing something else. I nodded, knowing that feeling all too well. Yeah, I get that. We pulled up to the place for my appointment, and as I stepped out, I stopped for a second. Thanks for the ride, Jason. He smiled warmly. Anytime, Emily. As I walked into the building, I noticed something odd. I was genuinely looking forward to the ride back home. In the weeks that followed, our conversations became a regular part of my routine. They weren't anything extraordinary or transformative, but they were easy, natural. It felt good to have someone to talk to, someone who wasn't distracted by emails or trying to get off the phone in a hurry. One afternoon, as we drove back from the store, I turned to Jason and said, Can I ask you something? He glanced at me in the rearview mirror. Of course. Why do you still work for us? I asked. You could probably find a better job, something that pays more. He was quiet for a few seconds before replying, I guess I stay because I like the people I work for. His response surprised me. I looked over at him, trying to see if he was just being nice. But his expression was genuine. I smiled. I'm glad you stayed. He didn't speak right away, but then softly said, Me too. My heart gave a little jump. I tried to brush it off as nothing, just a kind gesture. But deep down, I sensed something had shifted. I kept telling myself it was just simple appreciation for his presence in my life, that Jason was just being friendly and I was just lonely. But I knew better. Something had definitely changed. I noticed it in the way I lingered in the car a bit longer after we arrived home, how I looked forward to chatting with him more than I probably should have, how his words stayed in my head long after he had left. Still, I didn't put a stop to it. It wasn't that I planned to cross any lines or let things go too far, but I couldn't ignore how much I craved those moments of connection, moments where I felt seen, where I felt warmth I hadn't experienced in so long. One evening, I got another call from Daniel. "I have to stay another week, Emily," he said, his voice rushed and distracted, like his mind was already on something else. "I know I promised I'd be home by now, but everything's kind of a mess. You understand, right?" I shut my eyes and took a deep breath. "Yeah," I replied softly. "I understand." "Thank you," he said, sounding relieved. "I'll make it up to you." I promise, I nodded, even though he couldn't see it. "Okay." But the truth was, I didn't know if I believed him anymore. That night, I sat out on the back patio, looking up at the sky. I didn't even hear the door open behind me until Jason's voice broke the silence. "Mind if I join you?" I looked up, startled to see him standing there. I gave a slight nod, signaling for him to continue. He lowered himself onto the seat next to me, leaving a noticeable gap between us. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The evening was calm, almost serene. Eventually, Jason broke the silence. "Are you okay?" he asked. I let out a quiet chuckle. "You say that to me a lot." "That's because I mean it," he replied plainly. I turned my head to face him, trying to read his expression, hoping to find something that would make sense of his concern, something that could explain why he always seemed to notice when I was falling apart. "I don't know," I confessed, my voice barely above a whisper. "I think I've been holding on, waiting for my husband to come back for so long. I can't even remember what it's supposed to feel like anymore." Jason didn't answer right away. After a long pause, he finally said, "You shouldn't have to just keep waiting." His words struck me more deeply than I expected. I looked away, my eyes fixed on the floor as I struggled to swallow the tightness rising in my throat. "I don't even know what I should hope for anymore," I said softly. He remained silent for a beat, and when he did speak, his tone was gentler than before. "You deserve to feel joy." Closing my eyes, I drew in a shaky breath. "Being happy doesn't feel that simple." "Maybe not," Jason said, "but it also shouldn't seem impossible." I turned toward him, and for a few seconds, our eyes locked. I wasn't sure what I was hoping to see, maybe a sense of reassurance, or some kind of comfort, or maybe just something that could make me believe what he said was true. But before I could speak, the sound of a car pulling up in the driveway cut through the quiet. My heart lurched. I jumped to my feet, hands trembling as I moved toward the door. Jason stood up too, his face hard to read. The front door creaked open, and there he was, Daniel. He looked worn down, his suit slightly disheveled, his face expressionless as he placed his briefcase on the floor. When he finally noticed me standing there, his brows drew together. "Emily," he said. I nodded, still trying to grasp the reality that he was really back. "You're home? Early?" He let out a long breath. "Yeah, things wrapped up quicker than I thought." His gaze drifted over my shoulder, and for the briefest instant, his eyes landed on Jason. Though his face gave nothing away, something in his stance changed subtly. Jason cleared his throat. "I should head out," he said, turning to face me. Our eyes met briefly, and without another word, he walked to his car. I watched him go, my heart still racing. Daniel moved closer. "Is everything all right?" I made myself nod. "Yeah, everything's fine." He gave me a long look, then just sighed and ran a hand through his hair. "I'm beat," he muttered. "I think I'll take a shower and go to sleep." "Okay," I replied. As he walked upstairs and disappeared from sight, I stood in the center of the room, feeling completely adrift. Jason's voice repeated in my thoughts, "You deserve to be happy." And for the first time in what felt like forever, I allowed myself to confront the question I'd been pushing aside. Was I? And right then I knew the truth. I wasn't. I never thought my life would head down such an unexpected path. If you had asked me several years ago who I believed myself to be, I would have said I was a committed spouse, a dedicated scholar, and someone who held truthfulness above everything else. But life has a strange way of challenging what we believe, placing us in moments where the boundaries between what's right and wrong become unclear in ways we never imagined they could. My name is Emily Carter, and this is the story of how I ended up emotionally involved in a way I never anticipated. I first met Jason during the early months of my PhD studies at a university located in Chicago. By that time, I had been married to my husband, Mark, for close to 8 years. While we had our share of highs and lows, I had always thought of our relationship as strong. We'd met during college, fallen for each other quickly, and created a life that appeared nearly ideal from the outside. Mark was dependable, diligent, and compassionate. He held a secure position in finance, and we lived in a cozy house in the suburbs just beyond the city. Based on everything, I should have felt fulfilled. Yet something felt off. I couldn't say exactly when the change began, but gradually, our relationship started to resemble more of a companionship than a passionate romance. We still loved each other, but the chemistry, the thrill, and the deep talks that had once been central to our bond had quietly faded behind the everyday routine. Mark worked long hours, and when he was home, he was usually too drained to do more than eat dinner and watch some television. I didn't hold it against him. His job was demanding, but I often felt like we were living side by side instead of truly sharing our lives. When I made the decision to pursue a PhD, I hoped it would give me a sense of identity that wasn't tied solely to my marriage. Literature had always been a passion of mine, and I had dreams of becoming a professor. Mark was completely behind the idea. What I hadn't expected, though, was how deeply the experience would transform me. Jason was among the first classmates I got to know in the program. He was intelligent, well spoken, and carried himself with a kind of quiet self assurance that made him stand out. He didn't fit the typical image of a handsome man, but he had a presence that was hard to ignore. There was a laid back charm to him, a sharp sense of humor, and an ability to make people around him feel comfortable. In the beginning, our relationship was strictly professional. We had been placed in the same research group, which meant we spent a lot of time collaborating on assignments. He challenged my viewpoints in a way that sharpened my thinking, and our discussions were some of the most engaging I had experienced in a long time. We often lingered after class, going back and forth about literary theories, dissecting various movements, and sharing how we each viewed the world. It all began harmlessly. One night, after a particularly demanding seminar, Jason and I ended up walking to the train station together. It was late, the streets were nearly empty, and the pavement still glistened from earlier rain under the glow of streetlights. We talked about our coursework, our instructors, and the pressure that came with graduate studies. Then, somewhere during that conversation, he brought up my life beyond school. I paused. It wasn't that I had secrets to keep, but I realized I rarely opened up about my personal life. My husband works in finance, I said at last. We've been married almost 8 years. Jason gave a thoughtful nod. That's quite a while. How's it going? I didn't know quite what to say. It felt strange to open up to someone I barely knew, but something about the stillness, about the way he looked at me, made me feel comfortable enough to tell the truth. It's stable, I said slowly. He's a good person. We have a solid life, but sometimes I feel like we're just going through the motions. Jason didn't judge me. He didn't try to give me answers or draw conclusions. He simply listened. I understand, he said quietly after a moment. Relationships shift. People grow. It's hard to stay in sync sometimes. I nodded, surprised by the relief I felt in simply saying it out loud. From that evening forward, something between us changed. We still hadn't stepped over any clear boundaries, but it became obvious that what we shared was more than a casual academic connection. We started hanging out more often, studying late in cafes, having dinner after lectures, and sending each other messages about books and class topics. I kept telling myself it was just a friendship, that I had every right to form bonds outside my marriage. And for a while, that felt true. But as time moved on, I began noticing small things. How my pulse quickened when his name popped up on my phone. How I eagerly awaited our chats more than I should have. How my thoughts wandered to him even when we weren't together. I kept insisting to myself that it didn't mean anything. Then one evening, after a long day of working on research, Jason and I found ourselves in a quiet little bar near campus. It hadn't been planned. We had simply stayed at the library too late, and neither of us was ready to head home. We sat across from each other in a booth, soft lighting casting faint shadows across his face. We talked about our studies, our hopes, and the things that kept us awake at night. Then, after a thoughtful pause, he asked me something that made my breath hitch. Do you ever feel like you're meant for something more? I understood exactly what he was saying. It wasn't about jobs or reaching goals. It was about being truly known, about finding someone who saw the real you without explanation. I should have changed the subject right then. I should have reminded myself of the commitment I had made, of the promises I had spoken, and of the life I had worked so hard to build. Instead, I let myself stay in the moment, allowed the weight of his question to settle over me, and gave myself permission to imagine how things might be if they were different. That night, lying in bed next to Mark, I couldn't shake the sense that I was teetering on the brink of something I didn't know how to get away from. I told myself I was still in control, that whatever was happening between Jason and me was harmless, just a mental connection, a close friendship born from mutual interests and long hours of study. I convinced myself that people could share meaningful bonds outside their marriages, that looking forward to seeing him didn't mean I was crossing any lines. But deep down, I was deceiving myself. The reality was, Jason had become more than just a companion. He had started seeing me in ways I wasn't sure Mark still did. When we spoke, Jason really paid attention. He didn't just nod while scrolling through his phone, the way Mark sometimes did. With Jason, I felt that what I thought, what I said, my very presence, mattered in a way I hadn't felt in a long while. Even so, I wasn't planning to step over any boundaries. I was set on keeping our relationship safely in the space between close friendship and something deeper. But feelings have a way of slipping past even the strongest defenses we tried to put up. It unfolded slowly, a touch that lasted just a moment too long, a glance that lingered, a chat that turned more personal, where we shared memories, regrets, dreams. And then, one night, everything shifted. We had spent the whole day at the library, focused on research for a joint project. Time slipped by, and before we realized it, the sun had set, and the place was nearly deserted. Jason suggested we grab a bite, and without thinking twice, I said yes. We ended up at a small diner not far from campus, the kind of place that felt untouched by time. Red booths, an old jukebox in the corner, and the faint smell of coffee and grilled sandwiches filled the air. We slid into a booth and chatted like we always did, easy and familiar. But then something changed. Somewhere in the conversation, Jason looked at me differently. "Emily," he said in a quiet voice, his fingers tracing the edge of his mug. "Do you ever wonder how life would be if you'd chosen a different path?" I paused, unsure how to respond, though I had a feeling I already knew what he meant. "What do you mean?" I asked. He let out a breath, glanced down, then met my eyes again. "I mean, do you ever question if you're where you're meant to be?" I felt my breath hitch because, yes, I had questioned that. I had spent so many nights staring at the ceiling, wondering if the life I built with Mark was the one I was meant to live forever. I'd asked myself whether love was supposed to feel like this steady but distant, reliable yet missing a spark. But admitting that out loud felt risky. "I think everyone wonders that now and then," I finally replied, choosing my words with care. But wondering doesn't mean there's something wrong. Jason studied me, his expression unreadable, and then he did something that made my heart skip a beat. He reached across the table and placed his hand over mine. It was such a small act, but it made everything inside me freeze. I should have pulled away, joked about it, shifted the topic anything but what I actually did, which was nothing. I let his hand stay on mine, warm and sure, and in that moment, I felt something stir in me that I hadn't felt in years, and it scared me. After a pause that felt like forever, I finally withdrew my hand, my fingers slightly shaking. "Jason," I whispered, shaking my head. He looked at me, and in his eyes I saw the same inner struggle I felt. "I know," he said softly. "I know this isn't simple, but Emily, I can't pretend I don't feel something." I swallowed hard, my heart thudding loudly. "I should go," I said, pushing myself up from the booth. Jason didn't try to stop me. He just nodded, his jaw tight, like he knew that if he said one more word, I might not leave. I rushed to my car, my mind spinning. When I got home, Mark was already asleep, lying on his side of the bed, his breathing slow and steady. I stood in the doorway for a long while, just watching him, a heavy sense of guilt pressing down on me. What was I doing? I loved Mark, I truly did. He had always been kind, reliable, and never given me a reason to doubt him. And yet, there I was, standing in our room, feeling more lost than I had in a long time. I climbed into bed beside him and stared up at the ceiling, trying to force myself to forget the way Jason had looked at me, the way his touch had sparked something inside me. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't push it away. The days that followed were unbearable. Jason and I never talked about what happened, but everything between us had changed. Every look, every accidental brush of a hand, every late-night work session felt loaded with something neither of us could name or avoid. Then, one night, everything came to a head. It was after a formal research event where we had both presented our papers. Mark had planned to come, but work kept him late. He texted me to apologize, said he'd make it up to me, and told me he was proud. I replied that it was fine, but inside, I felt let down. It had been a big night for me, and he hadn't been there. Jason had, though. He sat front and center, nodding as I spoke, his face full of something I couldn't quite define. After the event, a group of us went out for drinks, and at some point, Jason and I were alone outside the bar. "You were amazing tonight," he said, his voice low. I laughed quietly, shaking my head. "You don't have to say that." "I mean it," he said firmly. "Emily, you're brilliant. You have so much ahead of you, and you deserve someone who sees that." I looked up at him, caught off guard, my breath caught in my throat. I opened my mouth, but no words came. He stepped in closer, eyes locked on mine. "Tell me you don't feel it too," he whispered. "Tell me I'm just imagining this." "Sure, Here's a full paraphrase of your text, following your detailed instructions. I parted my lips to speak, but nothing came out. I couldn't bring myself to say it, not to him, and definitely not to myself. And right then, I understood something I hadn't fully admitted before. I'd already gone too far. Not in a way people typically think. Not in a way that could be easily labeled or judged. But in my thoughts, in my heart, I had crossed into a place I shouldn't have entered. I had allowed Jason to take up a part of me that was meant for my husband alone. That awareness hit me with a crushing wave of guilt. I barely slept that night. Mark got home late, worn out from work, gave me a kiss on the forehead, and got into bed without noticing how rigid I was. As he drifted off beside me, I stayed wide awake, eyes fixed on the ceiling, emotions twisting in my mind. I knew I had to end it. The next morning, I made up my mind to put space between Jason and me. I avoided our regular coffee breaks, chose seats away from him during class, and kept any interaction between us strictly work-related. I kept telling myself that if I just pulled away, the feelings would disappear and things could go back to how they were. But it wasn't that easy. Jason picked up on the change. A week later, after class, he walked up to me. "Emily, can we talk?" I froze, my heart thudding. "Jason, I really think it's better if we— Just 5 minutes," he interrupted. Even though I knew better, I gave in and nodded. We found a quiet corner outside, away from everyone else. The chilly fall air brushed past us, and the dry leaves crunched underfoot. "What's happening?" he asked, studying my face. "You've been distant." I let out a breath. "Jason, we both understand this isn't okay." He ran a hand through his hair and sighed. "Emily, I never wanted to make things harder for you, but I can't act like none of this matters." I shook my head, eyes stinging. "It doesn't matter what it means. I have a husband, a life. I can't just give that up because I cut myself off before finishing." Jason stepped closer, speaking more gently. "Because you what?" I turned my face away. "Because I let myself feel something I shouldn't have." A long silence settled between us. "I would never ask you to leave your husband," he said quietly at last. "I just needed you to know you're not alone in feeling this way." I shut my eyes tightly. "That's the problem, Jason. We both feel it." Neither of us said anything after that, and then he nodded, accepting what I couldn't bring myself to voice. That evening, I sat across from Mark at dinner and truly looked at him for the first time in a long while. He looked drained, his eyes heavy from yet another tough day. But when he smiled at me, I was struck by an ache of guilt so strong it took my breath away. I had been so caught up in everything I thought was lacking that I hadn't seen what we still had. "Mark," I said, voice unsure. He glanced up. "Yeah? Are we happy?" His eyebrows pulled together. "What do you mean?" I paused, scared of where this might lead. "Do you ever think we've lost something?" He let out a sigh and leaned back in his seat. "Emily, we've been together a long time. It's not always going to feel the same as when we started. That doesn't mean things are broken." I studied his face, searching for doubt. "Do you still love me?" He looked surprised. "Of course I do. Why would you ask that?" I shrugged, eyes on my plate. "I don't know. I don't think we talk like we used to." Mark was quiet for a moment. then reached across the table and held my hand. His touch was familiar, steady, and warm. Emily, I know I've been preoccupied. I know I don't always show it the right way. But I love you. If something's wrong, let's work on it. Tell me what you need. His words landed harder than I expected, because that's where the difference lay between Jason and Mark. With Jason, it was all new, exciting, unknown. But Mark was real. He had stood by me through everything, loved me even when I made it hard. Tears blurred my vision. I just want to feel like us again, I whispered. Mark nodded and gave my hand a squeeze. Then let's find our way back. And in that instant, I knew what I had to do. The next day, I met Jason for the last time. I can't keep doing this, I said, my tone calm but firm. I have to focus on my marriage. Jason nodded, his jaw tightening. I get it. There were no arguments, no desperate words to sway me, only quiet understanding. As I walked away, I felt something lift off my chest, because real love isn't just about butterflies or passion. It's about showing up, making a choice, again and again. And I was ready to choose Mark all over again. While walking away from Jason, I felt a strange blend of feelings: relief, sorrow, and a new sense of understanding. I had been searching, longing for something, but I'd been looking in the wrong direction. Love isn't always wild declarations or thrilling moments. Sometimes it's consistency. It's quiet. It's being there day after day, even when it feels ordinary. I won't lie. What happened with Jason shook me. It forced me to look at parts of myself and my marriage that I had avoided for far too long. But in the end, it wasn't about picking between two people. It was about holding on to the life I'd built and the man who'd stood by me through it all. That night, when I got home, Mark was in the kitchen, making dinner, something he hardly ever had the time to do. He glanced up when I walked in, a small grin tugging at his lips. "You're home early?" he said. I nodded and set my bag down. "Yeah, I just wanted to be here." He watched me for a second, then pointed toward the stove. "Tried making that pasta you like? There's a decent chance I burned it." I laughed, shaking my head. "That's fine. I appreciate the effort." He handed me a glass of wine, and we sat together. We talked not about responsibilities or chores, but about real things. I told him about my research, about what had been weighing on me, and for the first time in ages, I felt like he was truly listening. Maybe love changes. Maybe it doesn't always feel exciting or intense, but that doesn't mean it's not worth holding on to. That night, as I lay in bed next to Mark, I understood something important. Love isn't a chase for a fleeting feeling, it's a choice. A choice you make again and again, even when it's hard. And I was finally ready to choose him.